Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Edinburgh Jewish Cultural Centre Live. I'm David Neville, and tonight I'm in conversation with the film director, Sarah Gavron. Sarah trained at the National Film and Television School and began working for the BBC in documentaries. In 2004, she was awarded a Best New Director BAFTA for the television drama A Little Life, about the parents of a seriously premature baby. Her first feature film was Brick Lane, adapted from Monica Ali's novel. In 2015, Sarah directed the feature film Suffragette, set in 1912 in London, exploring the story of the suffragette movement. Her most recent film, Rocks, follows the struggle of a Hackney schoolgirl trying to keep her family together after her mother leaves. So Sarah, welcome.
Thank you.
Before we start our conversation, I thought it might be nice if we have a look at the trailer for Suffragette.
Women should not exercise judgment in political affairs.
If we allow women to vote, it will mean the loss of social structure.
Vote for women! Vote for women! Vote for women! I'm done.
You work at the laundry?
Part-time from when I was 7, full-time from when I was 12.
We meet Mondays and Thursdays if you're interested.
You a suffragette, Mrs. Ellie?
I consider myself more of a soldier. As Mrs. Pankhurst says, it's deeds, not words, that will get us the vote.
We've identified weaknesses in their ranks. We're hoping one of them will break.
They're saying she's to speak.
This is a deliberate escalation. This has to stop.
For 50 years, we have labored peacefully to secure the vote for women. We've been ridiculed, battered, and ignored.
Punish those responsible, whatever way you can.
Mama!
All my life, I've done what men told me. Well, I can't have that anymore. Took my love, took it down.
I incite the women in Britain to rebellion.
Can I sail through the changing ocean tides? Can I handle the seasons of my life?
We break windows. We burn things, because war's the only language men listen to.
Well, I've been afraid of changing.
There's nothing left but to stop ye.
We're in every home, we're half the human race, you can't stop us all.
Time makes you bolder, even
You might lose your life before this is over.
I'm getting older too.
We will win.
I take my love, take it down.
So, Sarah, before attending the National Film School, you began film studies in Edinburgh.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that and what motivated you to become a film director?
So I didn't know that I wanted to be a film director until sort of relative, I wasn't like sort of Steven Spielberg, who aged 8 was making little films and so many other film directors. I didn't come from a very filmy family. I was very into art, and I was into politics, and I was into drama, and I hadn't kind of made the connection that all those led to film. But I was the youngest of 4 kids and didn't get much of a say in the family. So I think it was ultimately my revenge that I wanted to control the world. But I then became interested in documentaries late on, because I thought that I could tell political stories and I could do something that would change things. And so I went to university and did English. And then while I was there, someone told me about Edinburgh College of Art, where they ran a film MA, and I applied and got in, and I was excited by the idea of being in an art college environment. And I went and did this MA knowing very little about film. So actually I was the only MA student, and there were undergraduates there who really supported me. It was a year and a bit, and with them I made some short films, and that gave me the sort of bug. And suddenly I was just obsessed with film after that. And they were introducing me to Bergman and Tarkovsky. And, I didn't know who these people were. I'd seen sort of mainstream American cinema. I remember watching Top Gun and Fatal Attraction. That was what I'd watched during my teens. I hadn't seen anything beyond that. So suddenly I had this whole film education. And everybody talked about the National Film School, so I sort of knew that that was somewhere I could go on to do more training. But I meanwhile went off to the BBC and began as a researcher and worked in documentaries for 4 years.
Did you work on any particular strand of documentaries?
Yeah, I first was a runner at a production company and worked on a couple of documentaries, and then I ended up getting a job in political documentaries. So I was actually based in Westminster, and it was just as the Labour government were coming in the 90s, and it was quite a sort of interesting, exciting time. There was lots of hope at that point.
Yes.
And I was making documentaries about all sorts of things and traveling the world. I made one about the Commonwealth and got to go off with a little handheld camera to India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, and in my early 20s, which was all sort of hugely exciting. But all through that time I was having ideas for fiction films, and so when I got to 27 I thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to apply to the National Film and Television School to see if I can retrain. But I was so unsure and nervous about getting in for fiction that I thought I'll apply for documentary and then sort of sneak my way in. But I did at the last minute change my application and apply to do fiction. And there I went for 3 years, and that really kind of embedded my knowledge of how to make films, short films anyway. I think I made 9 short films while I was there.
Right. And you talk about going around the world filming. Were you self-shooting? In other words, were you holding the camera?
So I was sent off to do little inserts for film. So I was completely on my own. I didn't have any assistant with me, or sound or a camera assistant or anybody. So I was self-shooting and recording sound and doing everything. It was great, actually. It was a real sort of way of learning.
It must have given you a chance to, see how you set up a shot, etc. And make mistakes, of course.
And make mistakes.
Not that you did, I'm sure. And so you spent 3 years at National Film School, and then you come out into the big world, as one of our audience has just done.
Yes.
And so after qualifying, how did you gain experience and start making your way in the industry?
Well, so I really hadn't got any experience on a narrative fiction set. I'd only be on documentary environments, and so I didn't know about the kind of professional world. I came out and I got a commission from a scheme called 10 by 10 to make another short, so I made that. And then on the back of my graduation film and that short, I got interest from agents and stuff. So I signed up with an agent, and they got me into sort of rooms to have conversations about longer projects. And there was a film called This Little Life, which was based on a book, and the director had dropped off. So BBC Films came to me and said, was I interested? And I was just so excited to have the opportunity to make something long. But actually it was it was a huge baptism by fire making that film, because it was a feature-length film. It was the first time I'd, worked with professional actors. It was Peter Mullen, and who's Scottish, of course, and David Morrissey and Kate Ashfield. And it was a story about this premature baby, and it was very challenging. And my husband shot it, the man who was to become my husband, but we were really learning as we went. But that was a great experience, because I sort of learned about, sustaining a story and sustaining an arc, and working with, as I said, working with actors and working in a professional environment. So, after that went to various film festivals and won some prizes. And it was on the back of that I got offered Brick Lane.
And how was it working with actors for the first time?
Brilliant, actually. I mean, I remember Peter Mullen was quite a challenge in a great way, because he was playing the role of a consultant, and he was supposed to have these very, very specific lines about a brain scan, and he was making everything up. And I was like, oh, does it matter that he's just improvising, because he's so sort of truthful, and it all comes from, everything he says feels like it's real. But but what I realized was I learned a lot about working with actors after I left the film school. I think I learned more about it then, and it's such a key part of your job as a director. In fact, it's the only thing that only you on the set deal with, because the camera people deal with the framing. I mean, obviously you have input, but only you as the director deal with the actors. And I really learned that, that each actor is different. And that particularly became evident in Suffragette, that everybody needs a different thing. So, you know, they're like individuals. Some people want to talk for an hour about the scene before you shoot it. Some people want to try it. Some people peak at the first take and you always have to be on them for the, you know, and some people want the environment around them to be absolutely perfect. Some people don't care. Some people want lots of notes. Some people want no notes. So my sort of key to actors now is just to work out who they are and what they need to do their best work. So
was it your 9th film that began to get attention, and then you got offered Brick Lane? Or did
I
you...
did. So I'd had conversations with the woman who was the head of Film 4 at the time, Tessa Ross, and she had Brick Lane. They'd optioned it and they were looking for a director. And I, at the time, was trying to explore doing a different project about, it was really kind of reflecting my grandmother's journey. My grandma was a German Jewish refugee who came to Britain aged 17 alone as an unaccompanied minor, and then sort of struggled and hid her Jewish identity and hid her German identity and, you know, refashioned herself and had a really tricky time. And I was trying to tell a version of her story and struggling at that point to find a kind of vessel for it. And then along came Brick Lane, and oddly, I kind of connected with it. It's the story of a woman coming to England on her own, you know, and marrying an older man, which is what happened to my grandmother. So I jumped onto it, and also it was obviously a very popular book and it was great, but it was pretty daunting because I hadn't done anything like that before, and you know, obviously, and getting your head around another culture and getting inside another culture, which now I think, you know, would be seen very differently because we've looked, you know, the industry, rightly so, is thinking very hard about who tells what story and who has the right to tell what story and what your perspective is. But I already knew that I needed kind of associate directors. So I had one in India and I had one here who I was working very closely with, who were from the Bangladeshi community, who could advise me. So that was helpful.
Right. Because in a way you've jumped on a question I was going to ask later. You know, how does your own background influence your choice of work or the work you get offered? And I think you've begun to answer that, but we might come back to that later. So Brick Lane, was that kind of green lit? That was already going when you were brought onto the project? Or
well, it was I mean, nothing I've ever joined has been fully greenlit, you know, and what I've learned over the years is it's always this kind of process of, you know, you develop the script and everybody has to have their say, and then casting, and you know, you can lose the money at any point. In fact, with Suffragette, the week before we went into pre-production, after I'd been working on it for 6 years, we lost all the money because Focus Films, who were backing it, got closed down. So we had to refinance. You know, we already had our actors, and actors were suddenly on the phone, Carrie Mulligan, saying, what is this not going to happen? And then they'll jump ship and go on to a different project. So it's such a fragile beast and you have to keep it all together. So we went out and went to every studio and sort of repitched it and got finance again for it. But there was sort of never such a thing as a green light, almost until you're on that first day of the shoot. I've begun to learn, and you have to do as a director, as I'm sure you know, David, you have to do this sort of tap dance constantly to the financiers to say, this is the stage I'm at, and this is why I need the next chunk of money, and this is what we're doing now, and you know, and keeping them sort of involved in the process, which when we talk about Rocks was even more important because it was such an unusual development process that no one had ever done before, well, at least in the systems that we were working in.
So is that process sort of led by the producers of the film rather than the director of trying to get the finance?
Are absolutely instrumental, and a good producer is just gold dust in terms of kind of keeping, you know, getting the finance, keeping it on side and everything. But as a director, I have to do a lot of sort of showing my hand and talking about my vision and talking about why this actor should be in it and why, you know, and the bigger the budget, obviously, the more constraint there is on all the decision making. So with Suffragette, you know, we had to, in order to make it at that level, which we needed because it was a period film, we had to cast at a certain level. And that was a real eye-opener for me because I hadn't made a film at that budget before.
Right. And with Brick Lane, I mean, how long was pre-production? That's the bit everybody before you actually start filming. How long did that take?
Well, the sort of established finance pre-production has always been roughly the same on every film. So it's about sort of anything between sort of 8 and 12 weeks, where you're bringing on your crew, you've got an office, you're setting up your business properly. But the soft prep, as we call it, can happen for up to a year before that, where you're kind of scoping back, finding your cast and crew slowly, but you haven't got many people around you, you're not kind of spending money yet. But those last 12 weeks are really key, where the clock's ticking down to the shoot and you're bringing on more and more crew each week.
So in the soft prep period, are you doing availabilities on actors and then penciling them in and hoping that they're still available when you finally get?
And they're key for the finance, So with Suffragette, Kerry Mulligan was a key part, and she was the first person we cast. So we went out to her, and sometimes you'll have to wait sort of months for anyone to respond, and sometimes then they'll say they're only available in January next year or June or October, and you wait for them if you need to. So cast a kind of everything on that sort of film. But obviously for something like Rocks, we began finding the young people and built the film around them. So that was a total reversal of all the process.
Right, and we'll come to that in a little bit, because I'm really curious about the sort of timescale of that and how you worked with the young people. So Brick Lane was well received, wasn't it?
Well, it was a mixture of things. I mean, it was interesting actually, because there was this sort of what was billed in the press as a slight backlash against the filming of the story in Brick Lane. And when we got to and we had some sort of death threats and stuff that stopped us doing a few days of filming. But actually, the reality of that was we were working with a lot of people in the community. We had sort of women on, but we had all sorts of people on our crew and supporting extras and stuff, actors. But there were like about 4 men, elderly men in the community who were really against telling a story about this woman. And so they sort of kicked up a fuss. But it was really, it didn't stop us, and it wasn't sort of well-established protest, but it sort of got reported as such, because that's the nature of, a good story.
And and is it, good for the film that you get something like that coming out of the woodwork, because it adds to why you're doing the film, I suppose.
I suppose so. I mean, it's stressful at the time, but I suppose it is,
Yeah. So how long did it take to shoot Brick Lane?
So Brick Lane was a kind of standard low-budget film shooting schedule. So I think we shot, Rocks we shot for 6 weeks, Brick Lane we shot for 8 weeks, Suffragette we shot for 9 weeks, so I mean, a Marvel film you'll shoot for sort of 24, 40 weeks, but a standard British film usually shoots for between 6 and 12 weeks. Yeah.
Gosh, that's interesting, because there's so many complicated scenes there.
Yeah.
How do you manage to do that in 9 weeks?
Yeah, even less. Yeah, I mean, it's all about the sort of logistics. We planned those scenes. So there's a scene in Oxford Street where they're smashing windows. So we had to close down a big street in London. We had to bring in period vehicles. We had to do visual effects. We had to have lots of supporting artists. We had to have stunt coordinators. We had to have a period bus that kept on breaking down, And what you have is you have a team of ADs. You have 3 assistant directors who really run the show. And we had this brilliant assistant director, but on that day he was ill. He had a stomach bug, so he didn't show up, and we planned it meticulously, and everything came to a complete standstill. I mean, we started trying to make it work, and without him nothing happened, absolutely nothing. And so we rang up, Faye the producer rang up a really, really good other first who we'd worked with before, who hadn't been available for the whole shoot. And he showed up, and within minutes he got it running again, because he's communicating with the bus to go round the block and go past the Bank of England and come round. He's telling all the extras exactly where to be. It's such an operation. All I have to do is kind of give the vision for it, work with the storyboard artists, work with the key actors, comment on the frame, and we were running 2 cameras all the time on Suffragette, and a scene like that we were running 3 cameras. So you're getting a lot of coverage, bang for your buck, although the cameras were all getting in each other's way endlessly, and it's not easy. But it's really a logistical exercise, and I actually find shooting those scenes easier than I find shooting the really intense emotional scenes where you
really.
Yeah, we absolutely have to nail the emotion, and it's very intense, and it's just 2 actors in a set or whatever. Yeah,
That's fascinating, because choreographing you know, a big scene like that with buses and cars and people and extras and all that, you just think, oh wow, that's a bit of a nightmare. You know, it's hard enough on stage when you've got an ensemble or something. But it sounds like you're really dependent on your assistant directors being really good at what they're doing. And
yeah, it's such a team effort, and it's
yeah.
But it only takes, that's the thing with films, it only takes one thing to go wrong and everything falls apart, you know. So there's a rainstorm or someone doesn't show up, or, you know, it's very precarious always.
So how do you stay calm? Do you stay calm?
I went into a kind of zen-like state through the whole of the shooting of Suffragette. I don't know what happened to me. I was like, sort of, whatever happened, I was just in this car. I think because it was so sort of overwhelming, and, you know, but I did have very, very good crew, and that's absolutely key. You know, it's all about your crew. I mean, you're just not making it alone. You're a cog in a machine, you know, and the machine's got to work.
So how many production people would be working, let's say, on that Regent Street scene on the day?
On the day, well, so, you know, you have a sort of crew throughout. So, I mean, I don't know, on the credits, there are something like 200 people or something, but, and then you're bringing in supporting, the minute you bring in supporting artists, then you're bringing in a whole raft of makeup people for them, a whole raft of costume people for them. So then it spirals for that day, you know, you explode in terms of, and then you've got to feed everybody and do catering for 500 people instead of for 200 people. So it's, you know, it's a big operation. I mean, the biggest scene we did in Suffragette was when we went into the Houses of Parliament. And the Houses of Parliament had never before given access to a fiction film. They'd given access to documentaries. And I said to the location manager, you've just got to be suffragette about this and just keep going back, because they were saying no. And she did go back. And then they said, well, what's your request? And we said, oh, we want to stage a riot. You know, we want to bring in carriages and horses, and we want to stage a quite violent protest, which was based on the kind of famous Bloody Sunday thing. And they miraculously agreed, you know, and there we were, kind of 100, you know, women weren't even allowed in that square 100 years ago, but there we were, a predominantly female crew and cast, staging this riot. You know, we had Helena Bonham Carter, who was Asquith's great-granddaughter, and we had Helen Pankhurst, who was Emmeline Pankhurst's great-granddaughter. So the two kind of, you know, the arch enemies were communicating. And then David Cameron came to visit, and I said to the actors, do you want to come and see David Cameron? And none of them did. But, you know, but that was quite a moment of just sort of, it felt like historically significant that we were in there filming that.
And how many days did you have it to do that?
And we had 2 days in the House of Parliament, because we had one day in the you know, the amazing committee rooms, and we tried to film that somewhere else, and you realize that, you know, the architecture and the wallpaper and the detail in the House of Parliament, you know, it's unreplicable. You can't find that anywhere else, and the Gothic, all of it is sort of unique.
Amazing. So, you know, way back at the Edinburgh College of Art, when you began to think about going into film, did you ever imagine that you would be on this huge film set?
No, I don't think I did.
You know, and the idea that you would be, literally, you would be the person that everybody looks to for the next move. I mean, what does that feel like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with Suffragette was I was so passionate for so many years. I sort of wanted to make it for 10 years before I finally made it. I came out of the National Film School, and it was the film I wanted to make, was a film about the suffragette movement, and I could see that there hadn't been one. You know, there'd been, you know, Mrs. Banks and Mary Poppins, there'd been various renditions, but there hadn't been a serious film about the British movement. And I was reading all these diaries and getting all this information about it, but it took years of pitching, you know, and I was going into rooms and pitching a film about, and they were going like, a film about women and politics. You know, this is all pre-Me Too, what we now call the fourth wave of feminism, and there just was no appetite for it. And I would say, like, there'll be explosions, there'll be carriage chases, it'll be exciting. And they were like, no. And then suddenly that changed. You know, I put it down to, at the time, which now seems like ancient history, to the Arab Spring, where suddenly we were hearing voices of women a lot more. And it sort of started, you know, and then Cameron was wearing "I'm a feminist" t-shirt. You know, something happened in the ether, which we sort of labeled at the time the fourth wave of feminism, which now seems sort of odd because it was pre-Me Too, because Me Too has had a massive impact on the film industry from my point of view, and massively changed my feeling when as a woman director in rooms. along with Black Lives Matter, which has changed things again. So, you know, but so it was the amalgamation of all that was my passion to tell the story. I never really thought about the scale of it until I got into it, you know, and Abby Morgan wrote the script, and suddenly we realized there were these enormous set pieces, which I was terrified about, but consequently, because we planned them so meticulously and storyboarded them so meticulously, in a way they were the most planned, so the easiest.
Right. And so Suffragette was your idea from the start.
Yeah, it was my idea, and then I kept on trying to get it done, and then I went to Faye Ward and Alison Owen, who I'd made Brick Lane with, and said, I really want to do something about the suffragettes. And they said, well, we've been wanting to do something about the suffragettes. I mean, there were other people who wanted to make films about the suffragettes. Yeah. And there should be more films, because I think there will be, actually. There's a woman, amazing Asian suffragette called Sophia Dulip Singh, and I've been in contact with the people who are wanting to make a film about her story, which deserves a whole film on its own, because she's got an amazing story.
Well, I'm sure it's a subject that people will come back to many times, because it's fascinating. So, well, let's talk a bit about Rocks, because Rocks is a very different kind of film, and you had a very different way of working on Rocks. I wonder if we should show the trailer for Rocks first.
Yo, smell! Are y'all seeing this? I'm gonna be the new Picasso. These are your clients? Yes, yeah, I'm gonna be a millionaire. Put your pesky hands back and pay the money for it.
How's your mum doing?
Yeah, she's fine.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm not here right now, so would you like to leave a message?
Did the right thing by calling us, yeah, that's...
Come on, let's go.
Surely I did not go through all of this for nothing.
I think you should tell someone about your mum. It's just you and Emmanuel.
You wouldn't understand.
What's the problem? Talk to me. I don't get it.
I don't need you to worry for me.
You're nothing, such a beautiful word.
You have to leave now. Get out, get out.
'Cause nothing can be loved into something.
There's got to be a way to sort all this. You just can't keep going on by yourself.
Now we move forward.
I've got 5 pounds. I have 20. Yeah, I see the queen. The queen's shining.
Rocks, man.
What a work day.
Welcome to the future.
Wait, where's your tickets?
Close your eyes. Think of everything that is happy. And stop thinking about all your worries.
We're coming with you.
I'm actually sick of that. How you guys wanting chicken? I'm so sick.
So it's the story of a girl called Rocks, that's her nickname, and she lives with her mother and her brother. And at the beginning of the film, her mother leaves, and Rocks doesn't know why, but she leaves her a little bit of cash when she disappears. And it turns out that her mother's done that a few times before, but this time she doesn't come back. And Rocks is 14, 15, and she's got a lively group of friends, and she turns to them with sort of varying degrees of success, but she has this little 7-year-old brother to look after, and the social services turn up and she goes on the run, so she's really on the streets and sort of staying on people's couches. And then in the end she gets found by the social services, and her brother gets put into foster care, and Rocks go back to school and goes on a journey with her friends. So really it's about sort of the resilience and joy of female friendship, and the sort of the hardship, and what it's like to be a young person growing up in multicultural England, particularly London today, and different cultures meeting. And, you know, and our intention when we set out to do it was to tell a story of the young people that you see on our buses, in our schools, on our streets, the girls particularly, who just aren't centered on our cinema screens, and they aren't the center of narratives. And I had a girl, teenage daughter, who was exactly the same age in the same year, and she was at the local school, and, you know, and I knew what those groups were, and I just I knew that they were full of life and full of potential and full of joy, and I wanted to really do a story that focused on them. But I was, you know, a middle-aged woman by then, and far from those teenage years, and I didn't want to tell a story that was about my teenage years. I wanted to tell a story that was about now. So my approach was, let me build it with a team of people and make it really in a collective way, and cast the young people first so that we build the story around them. So I worked with this casting director called Lucy Pardee and an associate, Jessica Straker, and we went into schools and found young people who wanted to be part of a workshop process. And then we brought in this brilliant writer, Teresa Rococo, who co-wrote with Claire Wilson, and a whole number of other people who were key to it, associate directors and producers. And we workshopped these young people. And through that emerged all these themes, predominantly actually friendship. And, you know, they were talking about their lives and talking about, you know, they're one person at home, they might be living in a Somali household, speaking their local language, and then they go to school and they all have this other identity. And they're up against the social services, which is a hugely sort of, and the police, who they're all suspicious of. And it's, you know, it's a fragile world, but they're somehow navigating it. And so in the end, Teresa, who'd grown up in Hackney and was British Nigerian, had written a kind of arc that was based on stories she knew, and she describes as a love letter to her sister and to all Black young women growing up. And she brought that narrative arc to the room, to the workshop, and pitched it to the girls and to us. And we felt that that was the spine on which to hang the story. And then they all contributed, and she and Claire wove that into a working script that we then took out. And when we shot it, we worked in a way that really was, I mean, other people have done this. We're standing on the shoulders of a number of directors, from Shane Meadows to Ken Loach to Andrea Arnold, Lynn Ramsey, who've worked in this way, but we shot chronologically, which you never do in films because it's incredibly unproductive, because you have to go into a school, come out, reset yourself, go into a housing estate, come out. But we shot chronologically, and so that the kids could follow the narrative and we could let it evolve. And we shot hugely long takes with 2 cameras, and we never said action, and we let the camera roll, and we let them bring their own words of dialogue to it. And after every take, we fed back to the, you know, what do you think? And sometimes, you know, one of the girls, the co-star Ali, who plays the best friend, said to me at one point, "The scene's dead, Sarah, it's totally dead." And I was like, okay, well, we've only been filming for 4 hours, perhaps we'll go back and restage it. But what she meant was that it wasn't feeling real and the staging wasn't right. So I was really listening, and we were all listening to the kids' feedback, and we were all sort of collectively making it. And we also designed the crew so that they reflected what was going on. You know, normally you have, to be honest, and crews, you know, 95% of crews are white men, usually in a British film. And we had 70, 80, I'd say, % women behind the cameras in technical roles, from camera to gaffer to all those roles. And some of them reflected the ethnicities of the kids in front of the camera. So we were trying to make there not be a disconnect, but make it more connected, and have an environment where the kids could look behind the screen and think, I could one day be a costume designer, a producer, a writer, a director, a camera person, you know. And so that was the kind of ethos.
Yes, well, I thought Bucky, who played Rox, you could already see that she had some skills as a makeup artist.
Yeah, she did.
I did
side
wonder
hustle. Yeah.
Your makeup artist had been teaching her things.
No, she, amazingly, when we met her at school, she was a very naughty girl, and but she was making quite a lot of money on the side as a makeup artist already. She was doing it for people for proms and stuff, and that was how she was earning a bit of a living, age 14, you know.
Amazing, that's amazing.
I
So
visited her in a play at the Bush Theatre actually 2 days ago, and she's really, really good. She's really learning to be a professional actor. I mean, she has learned, yeah.
yeah, she's getting a lot of publicity, isn't she? So were you giving the teenagers, the young people, script, and then they were improvising over and above that script? Is that how it was working?
I mean, we weren't actually giving them the pages to properly learn. We were talking them through it.
Right.
So that, yeah, and talking to them as the takes went on. So prompting actions and movement and stuff, to sort of keep it live in a way. But there was a script, and there, you know, there were narrative arts, and the writers were around and adjusting things and working with the material, and yeah, throughout. And the editor was working actually out of my house, and I was going and looking at edits every night and all day Saturday, and sort of getting a sense of how the camera was working and what was working and what wasn't.
Yes, it's got very much a documentary feel to it. And what about your own cultural background, does that influence what you want to make, or are the things that you want to make now that might draw on that?
Definitely. In fact, I've become much more obsessed with it in recent years. And right now I'm working on a drama that's about sort of my Jewish identity for the first time. In fact, I applied to film school with a film that was about my grandmother in terms of a pitch. And then as I said, early days, I tried to make one, and then I sort of veered off that. And now I've come back to that material. And I feel it's more important than ever to me suddenly. I married this man who's a Danish Jew, and there aren't many Danish Jews in a small community. And I didn't realize at the time that I didn't even know he was Jewish. We were called the Jew crew at film school, actually, because there's a little group of us, and he was one of them. But and then when we married, his parents came to live with us, and his dad was a survivor who, aged 2 to 5, had been in camps, and he'd been in Theresienstadt. And so I started researching Theresienstadt, and there are some amazing stories about Theresienstadt, which, as we know, was a kind of transit camp, and that was one of the places he was with his entire family. And now I'm developing a film about the making of the propaganda film there, and sort of what was going on behind the scenes. So I've become really kind of enmeshed in that story.
And do you think, because of all the experience you've had, this now gives you the confidence to to work on something so personal?
It might be that, it might be age, it might be, you know, all those things. I'm not quite sure. It's just suddenly become I think we're in a world where there's so much awful stuff going on that I feel more than ever that you can only make a film that feels important, or at least I can. You know, it takes such a lot of time and energy and you know, resources to make a film, and I feel like it has to have something to say about the world, and it feels sort of like I've got an opportunity to shine a light on different stories, and I want to use that opportunity. And you know, and I know we've had a lot of stories around the Holocaust, but we haven't had this particular story. And also it's got resonances with fake news today and all sorts of things that are going on. So I feel it's sort of, I hope, timely and an interesting moment to tell this story.
That makes a lot of sense. And as I always think, we talk in numbers about the Holocaust, 6 million Jews, and obviously other people as well. But I always think it's individuals. It's not that big number. And that's why I guess we always need more stories about the Holocaust and other traumatic and terrible events in history. Sarah, thank you very much. It's lovely that you've been our guest tonight. Is there any other project that you want to tell us about, or are you keeping them?
I've got a few others, but yeah, nothing sort of very formed, but a few other things I'm working on. Yeah, I'll let you know when they're ready to talk.
Well, we wish you good luck with that, and we look forward to seeing more of your work.
Thank you very much. Very good to talk to you all.